After the Donkey Kong franchise went through an almost decade-long period of dormancy, following the failures of Donkey Kong 3 and Donkey Kong Jr. Math, it was actually this game, simply titled Donkey Kong, and released on the Game Boy, often referred to as Donkey Kong 94 to distinguish it and reflect its release year, that took the big ape down from his place on the shelf, blew the proverbial dust off his big fat ass, and hit stores a solid few months before Rare's Donkey Kong Country turned DK94's strike of a match into a fiery explosion. As you can tell, playing this game on the Super Game Boy not only allows it to display in full color as opposed to black and white, or the weird shades of green that the OG Game Boy was known for, but also gives the game an arcade machine border. So cool. I love it when Game Boy titles come with enhancements for the Super Game Boy, and this one was apparently the very first to do so. But yeah, speaking of the arcade machine border, you'd think, based on the title, the hardware it was developed for, and even on playing the first few levels, that this was just an adaptation of the classic Donkey Kong arcade game. After all, a solid port of the arcade DK would have been enough to secure an easy bestseller for the Game Boy. But then, the fourth level has a fake-out ending that turns the ending of the arcade game, and its previous ports, on their heads. Oh yeah, you didn't kill that big dopey primate after all. He's alive and well and has stolen the broad once again. That's Pauline, of course, like in the OG arcade game, not Peach. Yes, this schlubby Italian plumber has got hoes in different area codes. To get her back, you have to get through 97 additional stages, spread across 9 worlds. Once again, simply adapting the arcade game would have been enough for the original Game Boy. It is the understatement of the century to say that Nintendo went the extra mile with this game. But the devs weren't content to merely add levels. They also expanded drastically upon the game mechanics. A puzzle platform approach is taken. So while many aspects of the gameplay are lifted directly from Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Jr., a plethora of keys, switches, placeable and timed ladders and platforms, which if used strategically can save your ass at times before you fall onto a hazard, and other elements, with more and more added as the game goes on, are tacked on to give the original formula more obstacles and more tools to separate Mario from his goal and help him get there. Surprisingly, there are a lot of elements from Super Mario Bros. 2 that integrated into the gameplay as well. Both versions of Super Mario Bros. 2. No joke, the wind physics from the Japanese version are present in many of the later stages, and so is the poison mushroom, which is an item that I never knew made its way into a Mario-adjacent game with a Western release. One of the key gameplay mechanics in this version of Donkey Kong is Mario's ability to jump on top of and then lift and throw enemies, as well as keys and other objects, like in the American version of Super Mario Bros. 2. This is one aspect I don't care much for, because it's inconsistent. There doesn't seem to be a way to know, aside from trial and error, which enemies can be lifted and which ones will simply kill you if you touch them. Thankfully, the vegetable harvesting from the American Mario 2 is left in the American Mario 2. If puzzle games such as The Adventures of Lolo and Mole Mania are 90% thinking and 10% reaction time, then this game is more like a 50-50 split. Even after the first 4 stages, there are many more levels that pay homage to the original Donkey Kong in some way or another, and ditto for Donkey Kong Jr., either by replication with an added twist, or just by using an element or two in a level design that is mostly original. They had the good sense to not pay any homages to Donkey Kong 3 or Donkey Kong Jr. Math, though. You won't find Stanley the Exterminator or any apes grabbing arithmetic signs in DK94. Periodic boss encounters occur after every handful of puzzle platform levels, with DK and/or DK Jr. directly impeding your progress to the goal, or directly attacking you in a more traditional boss battle scenario. These are some of my favorite levels in the game, and they never become stale. The ones that involve DK Jr. pulling levers at random to manipulate environments weren't my favorites, because they are so chance-based, but I appreciate how distinct so many of these boss levels are from one another. It's not like in the arcade game where every level had a similar goal, which was acceptable in the arcade game considering it was an arcade game. Here, there are loads of different types of boss encounters, yet another way the devs went above and beyond. This game has so much charm. I love the cartoony death animations. I love the music cue that plays for the beginning of a boss level. Pauline's frequent wailing gets irritating though. We even get cute little cutscenes for every time a world is conquered, and the arcade machine changes screens. What a cool game. Unlike the NES port of the arcade original, which, while good, was a little stiff, the controls here are ultra slick and smooth. The platforming is nowhere near as strict and unforgiving, and fall damage is not as pronounced. You have leeway when it comes to projectiles, instead of one pixel colliding with another being enough to kill you. You no longer need to get every inch up a ladder before you're able to turn. It's like a version of Donkey Kong that had its axles freshly greased. It's still a great challenge, with some of the later levels in particular being absolutely relentless, but much less frustrating. An occasional moment of strictness will crop up from time to time, like Mario's propensity to slide from the top of a liftable enemy and then die based on touching their side. But moments like this are few and far between. The weirdest death I had on my playthrough was this one. No matter how many times I watch the footage, I have no idea what I did wrong or what killed me. But not only are the controls tight as hell, they're also far deeper than the average Game Boy platformer. I initially learned the handspring and later the other advanced jumping maneuvers, which become required fairly quickly, although not right away, by accident, and they took a bit to get the hang of. I'm not sure I ever truly mastered them, since even late in the game, I would occasionally screw myself and send Mario to his doom by triggering them inadvertently. Anyway, the handstand is done by pressing down and A, and by pressing A again as soon as Mario's hands touch the ground, you can perform an even higher jump. That's the most basic of the advanced maneuvers. It took me quite a while to realize that it's possible to throw the hammer when jumping or climbing, and then grab it again as it's coming down. This game mechanic is another difference between this game and its predecessors, and it is required for some of the later puzzles. Early on in my playthrough, I found myself wishing that it were possible to exit one side of the screen and enter the other, like in mini-games, but as I continued, I realized that the levels aren't really designed for that mechanic, so it's not a knock. Later levels, as I mentioned, are often pretty damn hard, but they're supposed to be. Overall, I'd say that this is a moderately challenging game, that is not too difficult and is not too easy. The only method of adding challenge that I personally thought was cheap as hell were when a bunch of different doors were included where only one was the correct one, or when the door was invisible. Thankfully, not many levels pull that crap, because come on, that's not fair. The difficulty is a little bit uneven, with even early worlds sometimes tossing in an absurdly hard level, like this one for example, pretty early on, where you have to jump across multiple fast-moving platforms that change direction without warning, while also dodging multiple projectiles and dealing with wind physics above a pit of spikes. But it doesn't happen all too often, and the challenge, for the most part, is an appropriate curve. The other real frustrating thing is being sent back to the first level after the most recent boss if you lose all of your lives. But I didn't lose all of my lives for the first time until the next to last world. Even if you're dying a lot, it's pretty easy to rack up extra ones by collecting each of Pauline's 3 items on each stage, relics from the original arcade Donkey Kong, to have a chance to play a roulette or slot game to get 1-ups. I got pretty good at roulette, but was miserable at slots. I actually did better at it with my eyes closed. Some levels even have 1-ups in them that you can collect an infinite amount of times, no matter how many times you end up having to replay the level. If they're in an easy-to-reach location, and they usually are, it's effectively impossible to lose a life on these levels. Another minor piss-off was the time limit. It's definitely not an uncommon feature for a 2D platformer, but for levels that emphasize puzzle solving, you can potentially burn a shit ton of lives if you're struggling to figure out the solution. Most levels are not puzzle-heavy though, because this is a platformer first. In the final world, every level is a boss fight. Oh hell yeah, such a satisfying way to end the game, with a gauntlet of punishment. The world is a short one, but damn is it ever a great challenge. There are a couple of minor annoyances to be found here. But the only major annoyance is that the last 2 stages require a game mechanic that is not required at any other point in the game. That is, handstanding to deflect DK's barrels. Now, you can use this maneuver before then, but I didn't even know about it until I consulted a walkthrough after not being able to figure out how to proceed. I am definitely not a fan of starting to require a new mechanic this late in the game. I also really didn't enjoy the final boss fight at all, so I didn't push myself to continue after losing all my lives and being sent back a few stages as a result. I had experienced the whole game, and that was enough for me. The final cutscene was not worth the extra effort since I found the battle to be more of a chore than a fun challenge. That said, it's really not a big deal that I didn't enjoy the very last stage, because it was one of the very few that I can say that about. This game is packed to the gills with great stuff to enjoy, and the final world, as I've previously stated, is mostly a blast, because it, for the most part, is handled exactly as it should be. A challenging marathon that demands mastery of all of the skills you'll have spent the whole game fine-tuning. I briefly touched on it near the beginning, but the timing of this release is extremely interesting to me. The Donkey Kong titles on NES were released in North America way back in 1985, which in video game terms would have been considered ancient history by 1991. That's a long time for a character to sit collecting dust, and then he gets 2 games in 1 year, each made by different developers and each being about as different from one another as 2 2D platformers can possibly be. It could have been total coincidence, but if I had to guess, I'd say that it wasn't. It's common knowledge that Donkey Kong Country had a lengthy development cycle for the time, 2 years, since Rare were of course really pushing the boundaries of the Super Nintendo hardware. I reckon that it must have been in active development when Nintendo decided to pursue this project of their own. A safe way to reintroduce DK, since the concept was familiar, yet one that still brought a lot new to the table. And it was low stakes, considering that it was only a Game Boy title. So yeah, Nintendo likely knew by the time that this project got the go-ahead that Rare had something truly spectacular cooking with Donkey Kong Country, and wanted to get the DK revival kick-started and build some momentum before that spectacular something came. But in my book, Donkey Kong 94 is spectacular in its own right. Beyond all shadow of a doubt, this is one of the better games that you can get for your OG Game Boy, and especially for your Super Game Boy. For real, this game is just so much fun, and it not only homages, but masterfully builds upon some of the greatest arcade games ever made. It's a major chapter in the story of Nintendo's first icon, and one that shouldn't ever be skipped over. This has been a Leaky Faucet review, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and for you to subscribe and ring the bell if you'd like to keep up with future videos. Down in the description is a link to buy me a coffee if you'd like to support the channel financially. If not, I want you to know that even by simply clicking on my videos, and especially by hanging around to the end, you're supporting me. So thank you for watching. It means a lot. Have a great rest of your life, and game on.